Our Town is a minimalist play. You won't watch a production of Our Town and see grand, elaborate sets and a whole profusion of props. On the contrary, Our Town, traditionally speaking, is all played by mime, so you wouldn't actually have a knife and fork for a scene where the people were eating their dinner. You would simply mime the action. So basically, by removing everything material from the action, the minimalism allows you to focus even more entirely on just the human action, the human experience of living, and it draws you in more to the conversation and the relationships between the different characters because you have nothing else to focus on. So let's talk about the stage manager, because he might seem to begin with a very unorthodox, very strange character to include in a play like this, but actually the stage manager as a creation is a stroke of genius. He functions in many ways a lot like an ancient Greek chorus, in that he does not move events within the story, although he does have the ability to meddle with time and obviously move some events forward, allow events to be played back, and characters do interact with him, but really you are just viewing life in the town through his observations of it, and occasionally he will speak and say something incredibly profound, and then the action will pick up with the characters again. Also, because of the meta theatrical style in which you are constantly reminded whilst you're sat there that this is a play, and are even told in many cases, or it's certainly alluded to, what is going to happen towards the end of the story. That takes out a lot of the tension and guesswork within the story for what is going to happen next, because it wants you to. So, say, for example, with the example of the paperboy, Joe Crowell, by telling you beforehand that it is going to be his fate to perish on the battlefield of World War One, it means that going forward, every time you see the character in the play, there is this dark, twisted sense of doom about the character, who is really, for all intents and purposes, just your typical good-natured lad doing the paper rounds with his little flat cap and his first job. By knowing what is going to happen to him later, it makes the moments that you see of him have more weight, because you know how limited his time is, and you know that he's going to be dead in about 15 years. And so, by taking on the stage manager's omnipotence, you're able to experience more broadly the triumphs and tragedies of all of the characters involved in the play. We'll approach this by just going through the acts one at a time, and I'll talk about them as we go. So let's begin mostly in depth with Act 1. As I've said, Act 1 deals entirely with just daily life. We see the milkman, we see the paperboy, and we see the policeman. We meet all of the people in the town. Bear in mind, it's a town with just over 3,000 people in it. And so, in many ways, it's kind of like an American Trumpton, right? It's just this really small C conservative town where nothing ever really happens, and yet change is gradual. And one of the first things that we're told is the fact that eventually, it's very, very quiet now, and there's still horses and carriages, but the first cars are going to come through in a few years, and that's going to change things up. More cars brings more strangers brings more homes, and so the town will change. There is a Polish quarter to the town, who are of course more recent arrivals than the WASP characters, who mostly take up the time of the play. And at the heart of the story is, of course, just these two families, the Webbs and the Gibbs. And as it makes a point of saying, these families have been there for generations and generations. Both Dr. Gibbs and Editor Webb are just very, very typical men of the time that it's portraying. Dr. Gibbs is something of a dependable rock. He's undoubtedly the man of the house. His Mrs. Gibbs is entirely subservient to him. It's her that needs to persuade him. about taking the holiday to Paris, and that is something that Dr. Gibbs is simply not open to. Not only because he's stubborn and he's at that stage of his life now where he takes comfort in routine, but also because of his moral obligations to the town as a doctor. He doesn't feel that he can just up and leave. This leaves his wife, Julia, in a position where, despite the fact that she always wanted to visit Paris, she never goes. She never gets to see Paris. She goes out on a trip a few years later, sometime between Act 2 and 3, to go and visit her daughter Rebecca, and she dies out there of pneumonia. But the money that she was able to save by selling an old antique, she then gives to George and Emily in order for them to help start up their farm, and it's an enormous success. And this is the thing that Act 1 does so beautifully. Not only does it put out the threads that weave themselves all the way into Act 3, but Act 1 does a remarkable job of just showing the simple nature, the simple beauty of a small community, right? Of small town life. And when the stage manager refers to Babylon and the way that people lived back then, he is really making the point that this play is a time capsule. Ideally, someone should be able to find our town in 1,000 years and have some vivid idea of how people lived, like what truly went on in the daily lives of the people in New England at the turn of the 20th century. But by rooting the play and its setting in the long story of history, even into prehistoric times, of course, when he speaks of Deveronian rock and Mesozoic shale, right? He's talking about like all of these things had to happen, right? You had to have these prehistoric periods for the land to become what it was. Then you had the beginnings of human civilization and Babylon, but we don't know as much about them as we wish that we could. But now here we have the opportunity to document this particular moment, this fleeting moment in the vastness of the universe itself. And what a beautiful thing that was. So by framing things in a universal way, Wilder is able to enhance the beauty of the moment because it gives you such a heartwarming feeling and appreciation of gratitude for life itself, right? This is a play that just simply celebrates the beauty of living. Even though the play ends in a very, very dark place, still that message endures throughout, and we'll talk about that more when we come to Act 3. One of the other things to talk about in terms of Dr. Gibbs as well is his relationship with his son George, because George, in many ways, bless him, is very much the all-American, just small-town boy. He enjoys his baseball. He wants to take over his Uncle Luke's farm, right? He has small but wholesome dreams, right? He enjoys playing for his school. He's, unlike Emily, he's not the most academically gifted, but he doesn't have to be. What he does have to do is to know the ins and outs of farm work, if that's what he wants to go into. And in order to do that, he needs to start taking some moral responsibility for himself. Because when we meet George in Act 1, he's about 15, and he's coming to that stage of his life now where the age of innocence and of play and just simply, being of that age where you're very much concerned with your own happiness, when his father has a conversation with him, he's really trying to address to George the fact that, come on, you're at a different stage of your life now. This is a time where you're starting to grow into a young man, and you need to take on the moral responsibility and the obligations to others, starting with your mother and chopping wood for her, that come with that, because you're never going to be a successful farmer if you don't start being your own moral agent and being responsible for your work ethic and the things that you do throughout your life. And not only is this a lesson to George, but you see constantly throughout our town different characters coming to terms with the fact that one particular stage of their life is over and another one is beginning. For George, it's putting away the toys and becoming more responsible and growing into a man who understands obligation and duty. For George's mother, Julia, at the time of the wedding, when she has to realize that the motherly role that she has played in George's life for all of those years is going to change, right? Now, all of a sudden, George is going to be with Emily. They're not going to be living under her roof anymore. And given that she's been doing that routine for nearly 2 decades now, you see her struggle to come to terms with this fact. As for Emily, she feels herself getting cold feet at the wedding because she's never had to trust a man other than her father to be her protector. And so this is an enormous leap for Emily as well, putting herself in the trust of another man and moving on from under the protection of her father to being under the protection of her husband. So you have lots of characters throughout this play who are constantly coming to terms with the fact that the old chapters of their life are now over. And it's something that we all have to grapple with in many, many ways. And we all have our own particular alarms in our own lives where those sorts of things are signaled to us, and we have to come to terms with them in whichever way we feel best we can deal with. What Wilder is also doing is, of course, making the point that just as characters were going through those sorts of realizations and trials back at the start of the 20th century of America, so they were doing as in Babylon as well, and so we continue to do today. Right? Wilder is looking for universal truths about the human experience, but he's doing it through the smallest possible window by just looking at life in this very, very simple town. Now, obviously, with this comes a little bit of tension because you're trying to find something universal about human nature whilst focusing on something extraordinarily parochial. By framing things on a cosmic scale, it all serves to magnify the fleeting beauty of these microscopic moments. As Emily says towards the end of the play, do any of us ever truly realize just what we're living, every moment of it? And generally, we don't. And that's not our fault. We can't. The fact of the matter is that every morning you wake up, you're thinking about the day ahead. You're thinking about obligations that you have. You're thinking about work. You're thinking about troubles. And yes, of course, you're thinking about many, many joys as well. But in doing so, we lose sight of the beauty of the most humble aspects of life. You do see moments where characters observe this, such as when Mrs. Gibbs returns from choir practice and she takes her husband out to simply look at the moon, catch up, and smell the heliotrope. And Emily, too, is admiring the moon from her bedroom window. George's sister Rebecca remarks on the fact that the moon is likely glowing on half of the world right now. Wilder is making the larger point that that opportunity to simply exist in the moment, observe the beauty of the moon, even though you've seen it many, many times before, it's still there for half of the whole world right then and there to unlock if they just want to rest, settle, and be in the moment. As Thornton Wilder himself remarked, our town is not offered as a picture of life in a New Hampshire village or as a speculation about the condition of life after death. It is an attempt to find a value above all price for the smallest events in our life. I have made the claims as preposterous as possible, for I have set the village against the largest dimension of time and space. The recurrent words in this play, few have noticed it, are hundreds, thousands, and millions. I tried to restore significance to the small details of life by removing the scenery. The spectator, through lending his imagination to the action, restages it inside his own head. In its healthiest ages, the theatre has always exhibited the least scenery. And there is actually, just to branch off of Wilder's point there at the end, another advantage to the minimalism of the staging is the fact that you can perform it anywhere. You know, it doesn't take a high budget. You don't have to be an ultra West End theatre company spending thousands and thousands on stagecraft. You can perform it very, very humbly, which is, of course, entirely in keeping with the messages of the play.
If you enjoyed this piece of premium content from the Lotus Eaters, head to our website where you can find more.